Welcome to North Point. We're really glad you're here. We want you to know right off the bat, our mission is to inspire people to follow Jesus. We know life is complicated and you're just trying to get it right. So no matter who you are or where you're coming from, we want to help you find growth, experience belonging, and discover purpose. North Point doesn't just happen on Sundays. So we want to make it as easy as possible for you to stay engaged all week long. That's why we're always posting new content, and the best way to stay informed is to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search North Point Austin and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Whether it's your first time here or you've been here for a while, you might be asking, what's next for me or my family? We've made it super easy to discover exactly what that is. Just scan the QR code on the screen or go to npaustin.com and click on What's Next. You'll find all kinds of options like groups to join, ways to grow in your faith, a team to serve with, how to get baptized, find support in this stage of life, and a whole bunch more. To see what's coming up, head over to the events page on our website. For example, we have monthly hangouts based on interest and stage of life to help you meet new people. Or a recurring event that's a great resource for anyone trying to feel more at home here is called Discover North Point. It's a one-time, one-hour event that explains our story and how it is that you can be an important part of it. From all of us here at North Point, thanks again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the service.
Hey everyone, my name is Jordan and I have the great privilege of being the lead pastor here at North Point. We hope that you are staying safe and warm, and just to keep it real with you, we are actually recording this on Thursday in anticipation of a major ice storm heading our way in order to keep our production crews and volunteers safe. That also means that because it's Texas, anything can still happen. We won't really know if we made the right call until Sunday morning and it's either a beautiful sunny day or everything that the weather reports say it's going to be. If you are one of our viewers from outside of Austin, or maybe if you have moved to Texas recently, it may be a little bit confusing to you how we react to all of this. I know I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and we didn't really cancel anything unless there was 3 feet of snow or sub-zero temperatures. And I'll never forget moving to Texas, going into grocery stores that were empty because sub-40 degree temperatures were headed our way. But the reality is we're just grateful for this technology and just a unique Sunday and unique way to connect together. If you're new, welcome. If you are a volunteer here, thank you for what you do and enjoy this unique Sunday off. If you give, thank you for sustaining us week in and week out as we seek to love our community well. We've been in a really impactful series to start this year all about change, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity to wrap that up with part 4 today. So Jen Mazzola is going to be leading this conversation together, and then I'll be back out at the end with a few important announcements. Thanks so much for hanging with us, guys.
Good morning, North Point. Several years ago, I had this idea. I wanted my kids to learn how to ski. See, my husband Sal grew up in New York, and so he had all these ski trip stories, and I grew up in Tennessee, and I had none, so I was like, I need to know how to ski, and my boys need to know how to ski. So I planned a trip to Breckenridge, Colorado to learn how to ski. Now, the problem, I already knew this going into it, the problem was I have zero athletic ability. I know that's probably going to shock some of you, but the reality is, you can ask my husband, you can ask my kids. I have zero coordination, and I knew that coordination kind of mattered, say, when you're skiing down a mountain. So I signed us up for lessons, I rented all of our gear, and we were ready to go. And so I started my lesson, and we're trying to learn even the most basic things, like how to pizza, how to stop our skis. And I was already struggling, and I went up a lift, which wasn't really even a lift. It was actually a rope that just pulled you up this tiny hill. And then I'll just show you. I'd like to show you my skiing debut.
All right, you good now?
So that video is my ski debut, and it's also the video of my final ski performance. Actually, when I made it to the bottom of that tiny hill, which I wouldn't even call a hill, my ski instructor said, hey, now we're gonna go up on that lift up there, and then we're gonna ski down. I thought, no, we are not going up on that lift at all. I was terrified. And so I told my ski instructor I was going to go get some water. And then when I went to get some water, I texted my husband and my boys and said, I will not be back. And I will be drinking hot chocolate in the lodge, which I have happily done every ski trip since. Now, the reality is, here's what's going to happen after this. I'm going to get a message or an email, or someone's going to come up to me at some point and say, hey, Jen, don't give up on skiing. It's so easy. All you have to do is, and then fill in the blank with their amazing ideas. And you know what? The reality is, they're going to be right. It's going to be easy if I worked at it. It's going to be something that I could do, but something happens between the wanting to ski and be a ski family and actually doing it. Something happens to me. I think it's kind of similar to you could tell me right now, our lead pastor Jordan just ran a half marathon, and you could tell me right now to go run a marathon, and I could want to do it. I could maybe even know I should do it. I could actually even be compelled because a wild animal is chasing me, but the reality is I could not leave this stage and run 26 miles at any nonstop pace, probably of any level of minutes. How many people can actually play piano? So those of you that can't, you can maybe even want to play piano. I could sit you down at a piano, but if I told you that right now in this moment you have to play me a piece by Beethoven, it wouldn't matter what motivation you had, you couldn't do it. Because there is a reality that there is something in between where we want to be and where we are that will require something. It will require practice, discipline. In fact, there's a letter written to the early church, written by a church leader at the time named Paul, and he says it this way, written in Corinthians. He says, all athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. He's talking about how we practice our faith. So I run with purpose in my faith in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. We're wrapping up our series called Ready or Not, just looking and spending time talking about change, about the reality of how do we change? What motivates us to change, and how is change actually possible? We're looking at this in our individual lives, but even for us as a community. We are about to embark on change. Ready or not, it's coming for us collectively. We're going to enter a new building this spring, and so many amazing things are going to change. But we can know about it. We can see it on the horizon. We can want it. And change is still hard. We've been looking at change through the lens of sort of a triangle of change. It's referenced in the book, A Good and Beautiful God. And the author talks about there's three things we need to change that all kind of also culminate in this idea that God is a part of our change. He's always aware of the seasons and the things that are on the horizon, the things that we're going after, the goals and the aims that we have. But there are things that we need to actually see the change through. We looked last week at narratives. Buck talked about how the reality is we have to know the truth to actually walk in the right direction. And that starts with knowing the truth about ourselves, who God says we actually are, what God actually says about our lives. The week before that, we looked at community, this concept that a lot of the change that we're trying to manifest actually can't be done in isolation. Not only do you need people to come alongside you, which I hope everybody had the chance to sign up for a group, but also because that change can only be practiced and lived in community. And in week one, Jordan kicked it off with the most important part, the reality that we are actually powerless to change on our own, that we need something bigger, something better outside ourselves. And this week, we're going to look at practice, habits, the final point in our triangle. And I would say that 90% of the conversations that you have when you work in ministry is some variation of, I'm trying to get from here to there. I want a better marriage, but the fights just seem too big and the gap is just too much. I want to grow spiritually. I can see where I want to go and what I want to learn about God, but I just can't get there. I want a better relationship with my kids, but I'm exhausted and I'm overreacting. I want a better dynamic at work and I want to enjoy my work, but I'm struggling to figure out what my purpose is. We're always trying to go from here to there. And I want to spend some time looking at the life of Jesus to see if maybe there's something we can learn. Because see, I think we do this thing with Jesus and God where we're just like, almost like a fairy godmother, kind of like we picture them and we think they just want something and it just happens. And I get that by God being God, the very nature, that makes sense. But I also wonder if the life of Jesus points to something more. As you study the life of Jesus, you find one of the things that he has conversations around over and over is potential. He was very interested in what life could become. He didn't avoid conversations around change. He started them because Jesus saw people for what their life could become. Wherever he went, change follows, not out of pressure or coercion or being a dictator, but because he saw the potential in everyone that he encountered. With Jesus, there's always an invitation because Jesus believed that change wasn't just possible. He believed that change was actually the point. But Jesus also understood what went into change, what required to live life to the full. And Jesus understood practice, the power of habits. Jesus actually had habits and rhythms in his daily life, and I think there's something for us to learn in there. I do think we view God oftentimes kind of like as things are just instantaneous whenever it comes to what Jesus or God wants, and I think that's true. I understand that by God being the nature of God, but I think Jesus chose to live his life in daily rhythms and practices. And I wonder what we could learn. So we're going to take some time just diving into that. In Luke's record of the life of Jesus, we read this line. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Other translations read, as usual, or as was his custom. He came out and proceeded as was his custom. He came out and went as was his custom. This was something that Jesus did on repeat. The Greek word actually there, ethos, would actually imply that Jesus did this so much it became part of who he was. It was how people saw him. It was his as usual and everybody knew it. If I asked your family right now, if I asked a coworker, what's so-and-so's usual? What are their practices? What are their customs? What is so much a part of what they do that it is actually just a part of who they are? What do you think they would say? Luke mentions Jesus' habit in another moment. It says he went to Nazareth where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue as was his custom. We all have our as usual, our customs, our practices, our habits. Our customs, our as usual, takes time to develop. And once it's developed, it takes time to undevelop if we're trying to undo a bad habit, right? Our patterns, how we practice life, has power. We are creating our lives by what we practice. But habits live in our efficiency system, and our brain is always working to be more efficient, to conserve energy, which is why new habits are hard. See, new habits or new practices, new patterns, new as usual, live in the frontal region of our brain, which has to work a little harder. This is why new habits can be tough. Like the grind of them is just difficult. New environments are uncomfortable. They lose excitement, so we lose excitement. They're slow to build because they have to think more. We have to work a little harder at them, and we're not really patient. But repeated behaviors eventually get stored in a different part of our brain. And once they move, you stop deciding and you start defaulting. Habits become automatic, and through that repetition, your practice, your brain is literally rewired. Every repetition will strengthen the neural connectors in your brain. It's like laying down insulation on a highway. And the longer you do that, the more often you do that, the stronger and the faster those connections go. This is why practice matters so much. But I think we all too often actually just wait to be motivated. Like we just want to do the thing when we feel like doing the thing. But motivation is emotional. It's inconsistent. And the reality is practice will beat motivation every time, which means Jesus's as usual will beat when I feel like it every time. If we do things or practice things on a when I feel like basis, life is going to get in the way. I want to go back to that same moment we started with Jesus, and I want to look at it again in a different way. Luke says, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. Now, just a little backstory here. This is the moment right before Jesus is going to be arrested. He has just sat down for dinner with his closest friends, talking to them about his impending death. He is well aware of the reality that one of his closest friends is about to betray him. He's well aware of what he's about to walk to. I can't even imagine a more stressful situation. And what does Jesus do in that moment? Well, it says, he went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. He goes to spend time with God in prayer. That was his habit. His response to extreme stress isn't panic or avoidance, but prayer, because prayer was already his practice. Jesus doesn't just improvise, he returns to his habits. Your stress will reveal your habits. Under pressure, our brain will bypass decision making and it will default to what we normally do, what our as usual is. That's why you snap the same way you snap when something frustrates you. That's why you cope the same way you cope under duress. Stress doesn't make you a worse person. Stress has you default to your habits. It just makes you truer to your habits. I have this friend that recently was in a stressful season and she was having some mental health struggles, but also work was massively overwhelming during that time. And she had already been in counseling and had a great relationship with her counselor. But this one session that she went to, she was just expressing how things felt heavy and dark and stressful. And her counselor said this is the time you need to remember to double down on your daily disciplines. What the counselor understood was that in times of stress, the things that we know we need to do, the habits that we know we need to have, the ways that we know we need to show up and practice are even more important. We will default under pressure. Jesus didn't escape pressure. He responded predictably to it. But habits, practice, these tiny things can be hard to develop. Our brains need enough repetition in the same context to actually go on autopilot. Researchers say that sometimes some habits take 20 to 30 days to form. More difficult, strenuous habits to either break or develop can actually take 3 or more months. But if you're anything like me, I'm like 2 or 3 weeks in. I'm strong for 2 or 3 weeks, but then I struggle. Life gets in the way, I get sick, something happens, something comes up, something that makes sense as a reason, but I never go back to the practice so it becomes my default. In fact, when people come and meet with me and they're kind of trying to get from here to there in any kind of a journey, like they want to grow and develop spiritually, or they want some kind of restoration in their marriage, I will often tell them like, hey, okay, I'm with you, but I need to be honest, this is probably gonna be about a 6-month journey. I kind of had this like 6-month rule. Because I believe that when we want to do something, we can kind of lock in for about a month. And if we really want it, and it's really important, we might stretch to 2 or 3 months. But when something becomes a practice that we've had for 6 months or more, it's way more likely to become a part of who we are, become a part of the way that we do life. It becomes our default. Imagine what that would look like even as a church, as a community. We're consistently encouraging one another to develop certain practices together. Like we're talking about what it looks like to get in groups, be in community, practice being vulnerable, practice being in relationship with others. We talk about what it looks like to engage, to invest in the next generation, to invite our friends, our family, our neighbors. What does that look like as a practice? We speak about being generous, living generously with our time, our talents, our resources. What about that as a practice or a habit? Imagine what we could do if we all committed to consistently doing that. What would this place feel like? We would be even more welcoming. We'd be even more equipped, empowered, and prepared for the people that are going to engage with us. And if that would do that to us as a community, imagine what the right practices and the right habits would do to you as an individual. Jesus didn't just decide to do things when he felt like it. He had a settled rhythm. He practiced consistently and over time. And there is this timing element to our practice too. There's this other moment at Jesus I want to look at. Mark reflects this about one of his habits. It says, very early in the morning, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Now, I want you to get that goal in your mind. That thing you've said, hey, in 2026, this is the year I achieve this. Got it? Okay, you probably know what it is. You probably know how to get there. You probably know some of the things that it's going to take. You probably know what practice even maybe looks like for it. Let me ask you this question. Do you know when you will actually do it? Do you know what time of day you will actually sit down and read those books you've been trying to read? Do you know what rhythms in the month it would take for you to actually take your spouse on a legit date night? All these things that we're trying to do you know when you would actually do it? If you want to read the Bible more, do you know when you'll sit down and read it? If you need to get outside more, you need to go to the gym, you need to read more books, do you know when you'll actually practice those things? I spent years telling myself I can be an afternoon workout person. I've seen that work for lots of my friends, but the reality is, I will not do it. I might do it once, maybe even twice, but I will find every reason at the end of work to not go and then work out. But if I do it first thing when I wake up, I'm actually more likely to do it. Do you know that practice, that thing, when will you actually practice? When will you do the thing you are trying to do? When will you do it? And then is your environment set up to help you do it? A few years ago, I heard an author, James Clear, speak. He wrote the book called Atomic Habits. And actually, it's funny, it's a spoiler alert for the book, right? It's about habits. He talked about how lasting transformation happens through tiny improvements repeated over time. His whole book is about making habits attractive, accessible, satisfying, to build a good life. He says you don't rise to the level of your goals. It's not your goals. It's not your aims. It's not our goals as a community that are the problem. It's you fall to the level of your systems. You fall to the level of your practice, the level of your habits. There's this one point that he made in his book that I decided to test in my own home. He shared about how if you're trying to work toward a specific goal, you have to structure your environment, like literally set your world up in order to achieve that goal. He said, if you want more intimacy in your marriage, take the TV out of the bedroom. If you want more quality time as a family, make sure that the kitchen table is cleaned and ready to sit down for dinner. If you want to work out or use that treadmill, he said, stop using it as a clothes rack. And so when I heard him share this, I knew instantly. See, before COVID, Sal and I were regularly going to a gym together, and then COVID hit and the gyms closed down, so we bought several pieces of equipment, and we put them in our garage. And it was fascinating how many reasons I was no longer able to go into the garage. Maybe it was cold, maybe it was hot, there could be a bug. And when I heard James share, I immediately knew, okay, I've got to bring that equipment inside. I got home, started to bring it inside, and I also had this immediate reaction. This does not belong in this space. This shouldn't go here. I don't want this in my living room. I don't want this in my bedroom. And I had to have a conversation with myself. What is more important? I'm an Enneagram 1, so this would be a hard question if you're familiar with that. That everything is exactly where it needs to be, or that I'm getting healthier and working more toward my goal. What is something you could do in your environment, in your home, to actually help you achieve your goals, to set you up for practice? Because the reality is every time I want to skip my morning as usual, that treadmill is staring me in the face. How could you structure your world? Is there a book that you need to put right in front of you, something you need to put on your bathroom counter to remind you so that you can no longer avoid it? Or maybe you need to kind of gamify your practice. There's actually some amazing apps out there that will help you do this. Even just real quick, just 3 I want to highlight. There is the YouVersion app, which is a great tool if you're trying to learn more about the Bible, but it also has these challenges. It has these reading plans, and you can check things off a list. You can invite others to read along with you. There's also an app called Habitica, and this is an app where you can create an avatar for yourself, upload your goals, upload the things that you're trying to practice, and then earn points and things for your avatar along the way. This one is if you're really serious about the changes that you're trying to make. It's called BeMinder, and actually you invest your own money in your change. It tracks your progress, and when you fall behind on your progress, it actually removes the amount that you've agreed to within the app. A couple of years ago, the McSorley family, a family here, actually shared with me that they do these bingo sheets as a family. They put all their goals on bingo squares, and at the end of the year, they look and see who got a bingo. So my family started doing that a couple of years ago. Last year, I had 3 bingos. This year, lots of squares, but nothing lined up. We need to know when we will actually practice. We need to set ourselves up for success when it comes to practicing, and we maybe need to make it fun. But we need to do something, even if it's a small something. I used to tell myself, well, we're too busy to get in a full date night, so I'll try that again next month. Or I don't have time to read a full book, so I'm just not going to reach that reading goal. A few years ago, I was attending a seminar, and this woman was in attendance with me, and she had just started a new company. She had become like a coach or a trainer for high-level executives. She had spent years working for a consulting firm, and she noticed that these executives could solve massively complex business problems, but they were still struggling in their relationships, with their spiritual growth, and in their physical health. So she decided to step outside of business consulting and just be with them in that area of their life. And she said time and time again, she would hear the same excuse or conversation come up with them. They would reflect that, hey, I don't have time to take a whole week away with my spouse, so they just didn't prioritize intimacy. They would say, hey, I don't have time to read that whole book because I'm reading all day at work, so they just never read for development. Or I don't have time to get like a full hour workout in, so they just didn't work out. But she would challenge them, and she shared with me what she says to them. She said, but isn't 10 minutes of something way better than no minutes of nothing? Now, when she said this to me, just know I was well into my 40s, and I had spent years telling myself, like, well, I woke up in the morning, there's no way I have an hour to actually get a workout in, so I just would do nothing. Or I can't finish that book, so I'm just going to put it back on the shelf. But her words made me think, yeah, I may not have an hour, but I do have 10 minutes, right? Jesus has this line that I love. We read in Luke, he says, whoever can be trusted with little can also be trusted with much. Now, the implications of that principle are far-reaching, but it really does have a part to play in our conversation around practice, around tiny repeated steps that lead to big change. God delights in our small steps. We read in the Old Testament, do not despise these small beginnings. This comes from a moment when God is speaking encouragement to people who feel like their work is too small to matter. They're not making the progress they want to see. So the book of Zechariah is set after Israel's return from exile in Babylon. And Jerusalem is back in Jewish hands, but it's a shell of what it once was. So they're standing before this massive job, this massive goal to restore the temple. And all they can think about is what it was. The temple's unfinished. The city's unimpressive. The people are discouraged and weary, and when I think about that, I wonder how many of us feel like that about our 2025. See, they can remember how things used to be, how it was when it was in Solomon's hands, and now they feel like the work is too big to even start on, and God is reminding them through Zechariah, he's saying, do not despise small beginnings. Or there are just some of us that can't do small beginnings because we have to do it all, or we will do none of it. We have to run the marathon, and we won't even start with, let's just go outside and walk for 20 minutes. We can't read the book because we can't read the full book, and we won't just take it 2 pages at a time. Or maybe we've got to read the whole Bible, when really what we actually need to do is start 1 verse a day. Or maybe even, what Buck even talked about last week, you take 1 verse and you read the same verse every day. God delights in your small beginnings, and it's those small beginnings that will lead to repeated steps that will eventually lead to the big change you're trying to walk toward. Maybe the reason the change you're striving for is tricky is because you refuse to make it small. Zechariah shares, do not despise these small beginnings, but start somewhere every single day. A small beginning is better than never beginning. 10 minutes of something is better than no minutes of nothing, because we know that practice plus steady work, our rhythms, will lead to the transformation we're trying to go for. We also know it's not going to be done overnight. We know it's not going to come from simply wanting it or even knowing about it. The only way to get where you're trying to go is 1 step at a time. And to circle back to what Jordan talked about in week 1, I think it's to invite God in. Now, I want to look at one more habit of Jesus, and it's found in this conversation that Jesus has where he is faced with every temptation possible. He's given the opportunity to have ultimate wealth, fame, power, control, and security. It's all in a conversation with an ultimate deceiver and tempter, and Jesus is offered power. This person says, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And Jesus' response? Well, man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. He quotes Deuteronomy. Jesus is offered safety, security. It says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it's written, he will command his angels concerning you. And Jesus' response, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, quoting Deuteronomy. He's offered fame. All this I'm going to give to you if you will bow down and worship me. And his response, Deuteronomy says, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Every temptation was met with Scripture. Jesus doesn't pause to search for things. He responds reflexively because Scripture wasn't something Jesus just knew. It was something that he practiced. And your brain will believe what you practice. Jesus' intimacy with God was practiced trust and dependency. And what if that's just the one habit you pick up in 2026? What if that's the one thing you commit to practicing? You picked 1 verse to default to when you're tempted, or 1 verse to default to when you're stressed, or 1 verse to default to when you're worried. Jesus doesn't wait for motivation. He lives from his practice. And under pressure, he doesn't improvise. He defaults to what he's practiced, his as usual, his customs. So I want you to get that thing in your head. That thing that you're working toward where you're like, 2026, this is the year where I fill in the blank. How are you going to practice it? How are you going to start a small beginning, maybe even today? How are you going to set up your environment to set yourself up for success and remove excuses? And then who's going to come alongside you in that? How can you lean into community for support and encouragement? How can you practice your practice in the context of community? And then check the narrative. What are you telling yourself about this practice and this change? Even more importantly, what are you telling yourself about the one that has placed that potential in you? And then inviting God in. Because then the reality is we are powerless to do any of this on our own. I can want to run a marathon. I can want to ski. You can want to play piano. But we will have to practice. The good part is we get to choose what we practice and how we practice. But the best part is God comes alongside us through it all. Let me pray for us real quick. Father, I thank you so much for the opportunity just to stop and think about how we can be intentional about what we put in front of us, how we structure our environment, how we take every step to walk toward the potential of what life can become with you. Give us clarity, give us fresh ideas on how to practice well. Help us do all of that in the context of the truth that you have placed inside of us, and help us to do that alongside each other, inviting you in along every step. Amen.
Well, thank you guys once again for tuning in on a unique Sunday. If you are or have a high school student, there is no Inside Out tonight. It's not really supposed to get beyond freezing today. Weather permitting, we will all be back together next week with a brand new series, very appropriately titled Housewarming. So invite a friend, and we'll see you in a week.